Everybody in Christendom talks about the same old books. Mere Christianity by C.S. Lewis, Chosen by God by R.C. Sproul, Christianity and Liberalism by J. Gresham Machen. All fantastic books, and I highly recommend them. But what about the hidden gems? The ones that are either too old to be remembered or ones that flew under the radar. Well, today I'm going to go through seven books that I believe fit this category perfectly. Number 5, in fact, that I'm going to go through is actually one I've just been reading this very week, and I think it's a phenomenal book. Oh man, that is reflecting straight in my eye. All right, I put this book I just put right down there. Before we dive straight in, though, if you want my list of over 400 plus Christian and Reformed books broken down into different categories with all the data about date published, the link to purchase them, what category of book it is, all that stuff, I've got 400 curated on a spreadsheet. You can access that for free down below in the description. Just click the link, enter your email, and I'll send that over to you. With that in mind, let's jump straight into today's video. Book 1 is Christian Baptism by John Murray. Now, you may or may not have heard of this book. I certainly hadn't when I heard of it somewhat recently. I picked up this book when I was deep diving into baptism. And this book was recommended me actually by Michael Foster, someone I follow. And he said it was what convinced him back in the day of the Presbyterian view of baptism. Now, I actually disagree with this book. I'm a Reformed Baptist, right? So I just want to make this clear. This isn't a list of books I all agree with. This is a list of books that I think are worthwhile reads. Because I do think it is a Paedo-Baptist view of baptism and put forward in the book. It's not just a book arguing for infant baptism, though. It is a very holistic book. So there is quite a bit I actually agree with in this book. So whether you're a Paedo-Baptist, a Credo-Baptist, whatever your view of baptism is, I think this is a fantastic book to read. It goes through things like the doctrine of the church. It goes through the mode of baptism, something I found particularly unconvincing personally. It goes through the logical arguments that flow on from that for what they argue for infant baptism, some objections. It goes through a bunch of other stuff that I think is really helpful if you're deep diving into a historical and theological view of Christian baptism. I think every Christian, especially every Christian man who's the head of a household, needs to go through this decision-making process at one point in their life. Maybe you've done that before, maybe you haven't. This book helped me greatly. It's not a long read either, so I'd recommend that. Of course, I read many other books that convinced me of the Credo-Baptist position, which I can talk about in another video, but I think that's a fair recommendation, I would say. All right, number 2, kind of on the other end of the spectrum, would be The Divine Covenants by Arthur Pink. This book, I'll admit, when I first picked it up, was a bit challenging for me to read. It's not a super long book, I would say. I think it's appropriate for the material it covers. But basically, this is a covenant theology book, so it kind of flows on from baptism, and a lot of the baptism arguments you make tend to flow from your covenant theology, right? Now, A.W. Pink takes a Reformed Baptist approach to covenant theology. People argue exactly which school of Baptist covenant theology he fits into. There's kind of 2 main ones, 1689 federalism and then 20th century Reformed Baptist covenant theology. Some people kind of argue Pink is on their side. He kind of feels in between at some points. I think he's more on the 1689 federalism side, which is what I hold to. But anyway, those terms may not mean much to you at this point, but I think it's a very worthwhile book to read on covenant theology. The good thing about Pink is whilst he comes from a Credo-Baptist perspective on covenant theology, he quotes people like Herman Whitsius, who wrote The Economy of the Covenants, one of the probably premier Reformed covenant theology books, right? He's one of the Reformed Orthodox. He kind of, some people would say he's like the father of Reformed covenant theology. He's really good, and he quotes him a lot. And I found that was comforting to know that it's a historical theological position, right, that A.W. Pink is coming from, even though he arrives at different conclusions probably to Whitsius. Again, those people you may not know of, but it's a fantastic book. Again, something that in particular men, I think really need to understand covenant theology well, come to a good robust view of covenant theology. This one really helped me. It goes through all the covenants, like goes from the everlasting covenant, it goes through the garden, it goes through the Noahic covenant, it goes through the Abrahamic covenant, the Mosaic covenant, the Davidic covenant, the covenant of grace, the new covenant. It goes through all of them very systematically. One of my favorite things about the divine covenants is his snarky comments towards dispensationalists. So if you're a dispensationalist and you're watching this, you are probably going to get a little bit offended, but you'll very quickly learn that's Pink style. He doesn't pull any punches, and I actually appreciate that about him. I think he's a fantastic author in general. You should definitely read Pink. Okay, definitely read that. Read more covenant theology books. Number 3 is How to Read a Book by Andrew David Naselli. This one, for me, has just flown under the radar. Like, every time I talk to somebody about it, they're like, I didn't realize this book existed. Because what Naselli has done here, more or less, and he might say slightly different if he was speaking about his own book, but he's taken the classic work, How to Read a Book by Mortimer Adler, who kind of has a Catholicish philosophical view of reading books, and Naselli has a more solidly Reformed Christian understanding, right? And I appreciate that because he's so simple with the way he writes his book. I think this is, if someone's wanting to get serious about reading, How to Read a Book is probably like stop one or thereabouts, in my opinion, because it just lays down some solid foundations for how to read a book well from a Christian perspective. It shows you how to choose books. It shows you how to read through them. It shows you how often you should be reading, and kind of goes through all that sort of stuff. I think it's really helpful. For me, honestly, it's probably stuff that when I read it, it wasn't groundbreaking to me personally, because I'd kind of heard these concepts from my background in education. I used to be in music production, kind of still am, and teaching and that sort of thing. And so like habit building, choosing good books, being selective, that kind of stuff came a bit more naturally to me. But I feel like it's really good for someone who doesn't know that stuff. I was like, this is the perfect ground zero for a Christian who wants to get into reading. Highly recommend it. And yeah, it just flew under the radar. A lot of people haven't heard of it. So I recommend that all the time whenever someone asks me. Okay, so that's How to Read a Book. Good ground zero if you want to get into reading. I'm going to switch up a little bit, go to another book on sacramentology, which is Amidst Us, Our Beloved Stands by Michael A.G. Haken. Now, this again, it kind of flows in ironically to the discussion about baptism, covenant theology, sacraments in general. The subtitle, I'll just read that out to you, is Recovering Sacrament in the Baptist Tradition. So if you're a Reformed Baptist, this book shows that Baptists historically and theologically have a lot more of a closer view of the Lord's Supper to Calvin's view and related people than the modern Baptist view, right? So the more sort of mere memorialism view or the mere symbolism view, he argues that Baptists held more to the real spiritual presence view, which is that Christ is spiritually present in the bread and the wine. And he goes through various people in history in the Reformed Baptists, 17th century and thereabouts, that held to that view. And he goes over some of the discussion, the argumentation around open versus closed communion, the debates that happened around that. And it's just really interesting to recover our heritage as Reformed Baptists, if that's what you are. And if you're not a Reformed Baptist, I think it's an encouraging book, because what it does is it shows that, hey, Reformed Baptists have a lot more in common with Presbyterians, Dutch Reformed, Congregationalists than you might realize. So I think it's a great unifying book as well. Gets a bit technical for some people who are like first wanting to get into reading books on whatever topics, but I think it's definitely one to pick up. It's pretty short. It's like 100 and something pages, 120 pages maybe, and really, I found it really, really interesting. Really liked the book. Okay, number 5 is the one I've been reading this week, which is The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis. Again, another short book. We're reading this for Reformation Book Club this week as our combined reading week. We do this every so often. We all read the same book. We get on a call, we discuss it. And I've been really enjoying this book. I've been wanting to read it for ages. We all voted, and this was the one that people wanted to read the most. So I was very keen to read this book, and it's been a blessing. It goes into the deficiencies in our modern education system, the way that educators, intellectuals, scholars think about the world is faulty. It's not rooted in nature, in God's nature. And C.S. Lewis dismantles a particular book, especially that he's critiquing. He doesn't really name it in the book. He calls it the Green Book. It's a textbook that was given out at the time that he was alive and was showing its faulty view of how people's emotions and subjective experience kind of trump objective reality. And I'm highlighting this book every couple of sentences. It is so good, and I think it's even more poignant in our 21st century context. These things that he talks about in the book have just accelerated in recent history. So this is fantastic. I mean, if you're wanting to read this now, it's 70 pages-ish long. It's a very short book. You can even sign up for Reformation Book Club below for free, join for a 7-day free trial, and read the rest of the book along with us. Totally fine. I would highly recommend picking this up either way. It is every time I read a C.S. Lewis book, to varying degrees, it does impact me. Some of C.S. Lewis's views are definitely questionable, but in general, they're very impactful books that he's written, even though I'm Reformed and C.S. Lewis is definitely not Reformed. Okay, that's number 5, The Abolition of Man. Number 6 is Honor Thy Fathers by Zachary Garris. This is a bit of a controversial book that came out, I think, about a year ago. I think it was published by Founders Press, if I'm not mistaken there, which is one of my favorite publishers. Now, this book goes through the Reformed tradition and shows the role of men in the home, the church, and the state, and the views that the Reformed Orthodox theologians had and the Reformers themselves about that. And it's a very honest book because it does show some differences in how, for example, Calvin viewed the role of women in the state. He said it's not ideal, but in certain circumstances it's okay. Whereas others were a little more strict and said, no, women should never be involved in the state. And it just is a really interesting book, especially in our modern feminist age, to show the reality that the views that most, even Christians, hold to about how men and women act in the church, state, and home are very new and different. And I think, this book's offended people, but it's needed because it's simply a pointing back and saying no one believed this until recently. No one believed that women could be pastors. No one believed that this is how a home should be run until very recently. And I appreciate, for me personally, the view on the state and women's involvement and men's involvement in the state, because I think that's something I hadn't read a lot on. I'd read books on home roles, and I'd read books on women in the church and stuff like that, and male leadership in the church, but I hadn't really read a lot on how that functioned in the state. It's kind of like consolidating a bunch of old literature in one volume, all on the same topic. And Zachary Garris has done a fantastic job, and I think it's a worthwhile read. Definitely something, and again, something that hasn't really blown up to huge commercial success in my view. So definitely an underrated one. Okay, number 7 is my last book. The theme of today has definitely been sort of Baptist covenant theology, which is something I've been reading a lot over the last few years. So I think that's probably why. This book is Getting the Garden Right by Richard Barcellos. Now, this book, it's about covenant theology from a Second London Confession point of view. If you're familiar with the Second London Confession, it's the main confession that Reformed Baptists, particular Baptists, have held to over the centuries, waxing and waning, of course. But this book, in particular, argues for the covenant of works in the garden, and from that argument, argues that the Sabbath is a perpetual command for Christians to obey through grace in Christ, right? So not a legalistic book saying, you have to keep the Sabbath to earn salvation, of course. But what it is arguing is that unlike a lot of people these days who say the fourth commandment to keep the Sabbath is no longer binding on Christians, Barcellos argues that it's a creation ordinance, more or less, that in the garden the Sabbath was present, and then from there shows the redemptive building up of the Sabbath and how it played out in redemptive history. And that it's still, even in the New Testament era, although there's been a change of day from Saturday to Sunday, it's still a command. It's still the law. And I think he makes a very robust case. Barcellos is so thorough. Sometimes I think he's even overly thorough, if that's a critique you can give somebody. But I think he does such a good job. It's very clearly painted, his arguments, that and he doesn't miss anything, in my opinion. The one thing I think he doesn't spend tons of time on is going through the Ten Commandments, because it's kind of an assumed thing that people know the Ten Commandments already. But apart from that, I think he does a fantastic job defending the Sabbath, the perpetuity of it. And if you are on either side of that argument, you're a non-Sabbatarian, you're a Sabbatarian, this book will either challenge you or encourage you or maybe even change your mind. It took me a couple of weeks, maybe 3 weeks to get through this in total. It is it's not crazy long. It's not like 500 pages, but sometimes there's some technical stuff to dive into in this book. So it is a more technical book, but I highly recommend it. And that is the 7 books. So we've had, firstly, Christian Baptism by John Murray, The Divine Covenants by A.W. Pink, How to Read a Book by Andrew David Naselli, Amidst Us Our Beloved Stands by Michael A.G. Hagen, The Abolition of Man by C.S. Lewis, Honor Thy Fathers by Zachary Garris, and Getting the Garden Right by Richard Barcellos. I'm going to leave links for all these books below, so grab those if you're wanting to get a copy. And if you're wanting to read more books with like-minded Christian men, I would highly encourage you to join Reformation Book Club. You can sign up for a 7-day free trial. Each week we set our reading goals. Sometimes we read the same book together. Sometimes we read our own books. And either way, we get together each week and discuss what we're reading. There's courses to help you build better reading habits, a like-minded community of men to spur you on, and much, much more. We're always expanding and improving the community. So join below. And don't forget to grab that free list of books that I've put together. It's down below in the description. Just enter your email on that page and I'll send it over to you. I hope this video has blessed you, given you some books to read. And until next time, God bless.